I'm going to walk you through the steps on how to create your first subassembly for your puzzle cube project. And so what you're going to want to do is figure out two parts that fit together in your puzzle cube. And we're going to assemble those two parts. So you want to go out where you have your parts saved, and you're going to find those two parts that you want to put together. And so in my case, I'm going to put together my orange part. So I'll click, and then I'll open that part, place that part in my assembly by clicking, and you can see that it places the part. I'll just hit escape on my keyboard to get rid of the place function. Then I'll go ahead and click place again, find the other part I want to place, and I'll go ahead and click open, and again I will click to place that part. Alright, and then I'll hit escape to clear that function out. So the first thing I'm going to do when I assemble my puzzle cube is we're going to assemble our puzzle cube with constraints. And so there's basically two ways that we're going to constrain most things, and two constraints that we're going to use to put together our puzzle cube. And so I'll go ahead and click constraint. The first one is a mate constraint. And so mate is the type of constraint here, and there's two ways to use the mate constraint. One is called a mate and the other is called a flush. And so the best way I can explain to you a mate and a flush constraint is if I am going to mate my two palms together on my hand, I will put them together and they're mated together. Alright? So those two surfaces, both the palms of my hand, are going to touch each other. That's a mate constraint. You're putting two surfaces together. The other one is a flush constraint. And so how a flush constraint works is it lines up two edges. And so what I could do is I could mate my palms together, but they can still move this way, and they can move this way and this way. Alright? And so I'll have to add another constraint called a flush constraint. And so if I flushed my fingers, that would mean my fingertips would line up with each other. Alright? And so to apply that to our puzzle cube assignment, this is how my cube will go together. This surface touches this surface, so I will click to mate those surfaces together. And you can see that if I click apply, that those surfaces have been mated together. They still move. It looks like I can move this part way out here, but if I look at the right side view of it, I can see that those surfaces are actually mated together. Alright? And so we have to add a couple more constraints to fully constrain this object. And so the next thing I can do is I'll click constrain again, and I can flush up the top surfaces of this. And so this surface and this surface, they should be on the same plane and they should line up. So I'll click flush constraint, and basically what I'm doing is I'm telling that surface to be at the same level as this surface, or to make them flush with each other. Alright? And so again I'll hit apply, and I'll hit escape to clear that command, and you can see that now my object still has 1 degree of freedom and can move in one direction. And so there's a few different ways I could put this last constraint in to help this object. I could mate this surface to this surface, and that would do it for me. Or I could flush this surface with this surface, and that would add a constraint for me that would work. And so I'm going to go ahead and click constraint. I'm going to click flush, and I'll click this surface with this surface, and it makes those surfaces flush to each other. And now if I try to move my object, it's fully constrained. So those parts have no degrees of freedom left, and they're hooked together and constrained exactly the way they should be. So when you're done with that, you want to go ahead and go to File, go to Save As, and you'll want to save this as Subassembly 1, and then your initials.